All right. All right, we'll go ahead and get started then, if that works. So my name is Corey Druliano. I'm an architect with Bettisworth North, and I'm joined with Mark Keimer, who's a landscape architect, and also Melissa Babb, also a landscape architect, both in our Anchorage office. Today we'll be talking about the underutilized lots in downtown Anchorage and be discussing some of our analysis of those and also some of the considerations that we have regarding their potential use and maybe some of the challenges associated with their use. Craig, can I ask what your background is, just so I'm aware of kind of the information I'm providing and any questions you might have?
Yeah, my background is I've been the transportation planning manager here for a little over 18 years. So that's the federally mandated MPO. It's similar to what is now called FAST up in Fairbanks.
Yeah, you're
No,
Jackson Fox's Anchorage counterpart.
I am. Well, I was. I just took over Michelle's job as a planning director. So
Great.
Little bit of a change of pace.
Okay, terrific. Well,
change.
feel free to interrupt if you have any questions kind of as we go. The information is, we've tried to organize it as best as possible, but there is a lot to consider. And I think that's probably why we were asked to undertake this exercise, because of its complexity. So
Corey, could I jump in super quick?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Craig, you were present last week, weren't you, at this similar presentation?
I did hear it once, but
okay.
Because it's basically a completely different language to me, since it's not federal transportation planning regs. As many refreshers as I can get is good.
Sounds good. I just wanted to clarify for Corey as he presents.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah, last time I jumped in, it was like coming into church late. The whole church is already there. It's kind of overwhelming. So anyway, okay, we'll do a little more intimate session today, which will be good. So yeah, if you have questions about terminology, feel free to ask, and either I or Mark or Melissa can field it. So let's kind of start out. The lots that we're talking about today are really located within the downtown area of Anchorage, essentially everything north of the park here, and then more or less to the west of the cemetery over here. So I'll jump into our board and kind of start us off with the summary of this project. So I apologize for the text here at the beginning. It just kind of helps keep things organized, but the rest of the material will be really visual in nature. So this project is an analysis of achievable square footage on a broad sampling of lots. There were really kind of 4 things that we considered. 3 of those were really influential in the calculations that we did. So the first things that we looked at were the Title 21 zoning. That's like the B-2A, 2B, and 2C. And each of those carry a different density, or different built-in density, let's say. Item number 2 is the downtown land use district, and this is a draft map right now, but it basically stipulates building heights, the amount of residential dwelling units per acre, and then we also kind of cross-reference that with lot sizes. There's a huge range of different lot sizes in downtown Anchorage that are sort of tagged as underutilized, and they tend to be surface parking lots. And then the 4th item is seismic hazard zones. We did consider these, but we found that really the only implications on the building occupancy, size, density, etc., had to do with things in Zone 5, and there were just so few lots in Zone 5 that we're disregarding it for now. So let me scroll back in. So really the goal of this effort was to kind of understand what's the maximum build out capacity of all these different lots, given the current regulations, and then try to find where there might be any issues with conflicting regulations or just challenges to development. So let's kind of scroll over here, and I'll go to those maps so we can just put a visual to those different parameters. So here's kind of our downtown Anchorage underutilized lots. They're highlighted in pink here. And as I mentioned, there's a range of sizes, and what we really focused on for our analysis were kind of the small and medium-sized lots. So the small lots, the kind of single ones here, ranged from like 6,500 square feet to about 7,000 square feet. And then we looked at mid-range lots, and those tended to be, around 14 to 30,000 square feet, and we did do a couple samplings of these half blocks, which is about an acre, around 43,000 square feet. So between those, that gave us kind of a sampling of different development potential for different, size of landowner use. The next thing we did is look at the different Title 21 zones, which you can kind of see highlighted here. So there's quite a few in downtown, but we really focused on the 2A, 2B, and 2Cs. We ignored the PLIs and some of the ROs just because they were so peripheral to the majority of the blocks that we were looking at.
I'm sorry, Corey. It looks like Ron has his hand up.
Oh, yeah, certainly. Go ahead, Ron.
On the last slide where you talked about the underutilized lots, almost all of those, 90% of them were parking lots, and we have no parking down there. Without solving parking, you can't say these are underutilized in the sense that they're all pretty much full when the parking's going on, because without parking garages, you can't go there, can you, fully? And say they're underutilized. I mean, I understand for building wise they are, but the parking, having no parking required downtown means you either have parking garages or you have these lots that are serving all these parts of town that need parking. If they were completely underutilized, they'd be empty all the time.
So Ron, let me answer that real quickly. In 2007, at the height of our economy, we have a study, a parking use study that ACDA completed. And during the peak period, they went out and looked at both the parking lots and the on-street parking. And what we found was there was over 1 million square feet of parking that was being underused during peak period in 2007. So while we're saying yes, that the parking lots are underused, by and large, they're not parked at capacity right now. And I know it's kind of a weird term maybe, but that's what the direction that I gave them. Now, we do know that some lots are significantly used, ConocoPhillips and maybe the ones next to the Atwood building, sometimes over by the PAC. But by and large, these lots are not at capacity 8 hours a day in downtown area.
And I mean, Christine, can I jump into this as Shanna?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the term underutilized, Ron, is something that, always needs definition depending on what study's being done. And so from the perspective of, building out our downtown and with the highest and best use for development, definitely surface parking would fall into an underutilized category. And I think, echoing what Christine said, the parking capacity in downtown is strong. If we saw all of the pink lots build out, next year, which is, not going to happen in terms of the ability to make that level of development happen that quickly, we would certainly need to add more structured parking to make everything come together. But from the perspective of identifying which lots across downtown have the potential to add, more intensive uses and highest and best value would, the surface lots would fall in that category.
Perfect, thanks.
Okay, great. And we'll be sure to go ahead and add that definition at the beginning of our summary there, underutilized from a perspective of, building density or economic performance, let's say. Okay, so we've got that map that we're working with. Then another kind of consideration when we're, calculating potential density on any of these is looking at the different zoning elements. And each of these zoning elements basically with current Title 21 builds in a base amount of density. You get a certain number of stories by right by owning one of these lots. And we'll talk about what those numbers are here in just a minute. And then on top of that, there is the kind of draft downtown districts and the land use. And as I mentioned before, each one of these helps define a character for the neighborhood, both in how the streets look, some of the elements about the building, like how many stories, the kind of targeted range is, other kind of character elements. Christine, do you have anything to add to kind of central to these districts?
Yeah, just for Ron's learning, and Craig too, 2007 downtown plan had a strategy diagram in there. They did not call it a land use plan map. So for the plan update, we took that strategy diagram, we changed a couple of the names, we added Ship Creek, and added the east part of downtown over to Ingra, and to give the new district plan a land use plan map, which is required in code. Neighborhood and district plans need to have a land use plan map. So I just want to caveat, because Corey's gonna talk about the bumping that Title 21 and this land use plan map do. This draft map hasn't been adopted. It can definitely be changed. There's language in the descriptions that can definitely be changed. But for the purpose of what they were doing, and that we had this draft at this time, that's what they used.
Okay, great. So yeah, this is another layer on top of the other pieces, and we will talk about where some of them collide. And some of those collisions are kind of on purpose because they're trying to drive a character, and some of them I think are sort of accidental and really limit the development potential. And then the last layer on top of all this is
Excuse me, on that, can you bring that up again?
Yeah, certainly.
Between the mushing district and the downtown core, it looks like it runs right through the middle of buildings. Why would we do that?
It's actually jogging around, and I apologize for the low resolution
The
of the map.
isn't going right through buildings? Is there an alley between all them?
Yeah, there's an alley.
Yeah, there's an alley there, Ron.
Okay, perfect.
Yep. Yeah, and it's mostly the historic district of downtown there. So we didn't include like the block that the Fangs own. We included the property that the Muni owns with the park there, and then those smaller historic buildings that are downtown.
Yeah, and that'll come into play here in just a minute when we start talking about the collision between Title 21 and the district use map. Any other questions on that, Ron or Craig? Kind of the reason around some of these boundaries? Okay, great. I'll keep moving on. I'll rely on you guys to either raise your hand or interject like you just have. The last level of complexity in this whole analysis is the seismic. And as I mentioned before, really the only thing that has major impact on the property owners, development rights is in these zone 5, seismic zone 5, and those areas are the most likely to experience high levels of liquefaction or other, seismic settling as a result of a major earthquake. So if you are developing on those lots, there are limitations to the building type. And the maximum number of occupants on a lot. So to give you an example, you couldn't have a hotel in any of those locations because of the high density, and you can't have a building that would allow for an occupancy of more than 500 people. And again, this is all driven by life safety and kind of acceptable risk built within the code. So again, because so few of our lots fell within these study areas, we really focused more on the zone 4 and zone 3 seismic areas. We're going to just go ahead and kind of set this piece and its implications aside for our calculations. So after we looked at all of these things, the kind of lot locations, the Title 21, the downtown district map, and the seismic, we tossed together a map, and it was pretty complex. There's a lot happening here. So we shed the seismic off of it, and I'll show you essentially what that map turned into. I can find it here. So let me tuck away some of these things from last time. So here you can see the downtown districts. They're kind of highlighted in these various colors. And then another layer on top of that are these gray lines that you see kind of tracing here. And those help delineate the different Title 21 areas. So, if you zoom into this area, you can see that Park Strip North has got some of its lots in B2B, some of its lots in B2C. Same goes with the downtown core district, which actually has lots across the spectrum in A, B, and C. So you can see that when we're trying to break out these case study lots, we're essentially developing this large Punnett square of a cross section between the downtown districts and the zoning code, as well as lot size. So for your kind of references, we essentially grabbed 2 of each in each area, kind of a small and either a mid or medium large size lot, and then started kind of working through the calculations of what's implicated in trying to build any sort of density on those lots. And we intentionally left a lot information off these because what we're really trying to describe is sort of a trend that, say you own a small lot in Barrow and you're in B2B, well, here's kind of the development potential of that lot, how many stories or how many square feet you can basically build given the pressures of Title 21 and the downtown district. So that's kind of the framing of the challenge here. And then, over the next few minutes or the rest of the hour here, we'll talk about how we got to the numbers and the assumptions that we made. So does this premise, is it pretty clear for you, Ron, Craig? Or do you have any questions up till now?
No
Thumbs up.
for me.
Okay, great. All right, we'll keep going. So there are some assumptions that we had to make, and I'll kind of go through how and why we did those. If you guys have leafed through Title 21, I don't know why you would ever do that passively, but it is a pretty thick document. It's got a lot of information packed into it, and we had to, within reason, kind of hammer down some of our assumptions that would be likely case conditions for a developer and an architect showing up on site to kind of work out, okay, what can we do here? So some of these we've already mentioned, but I'll sort of recap them here. We're looking at small and medium lots and primarily parking lots, again, because they lack a sort of built density. We'll talk a lot about parking as it relates to this for a couple of reasons. And I mentioned the range before, but the kind of 7 to 10 and then above 7 to around 20, and then our largest lot size is about 43. I do want to say that we deliberately disregarded the large lots, anything more than a half block, basically because of their size. The doors open pretty wide to a much broader range of scrutiny and consideration, and also, quite frankly, the amount of parking that they could potentially accommodate on site. An example is the Conoco building. That's just at such a scale that, let's see if I can get to that tab. The Conoco building is just so large that it can really accommodate a lot of underground parking. And that's because, these large lots too, they start to bridge an alleyway, which really changes the way that block functions. So we're ignoring conditions like this in terms of what could the potential development be. So here's an example of one of those, basically 2-acre lots that's engulfed the alleyway that would be there. Another thing is we're assuming a build out to the 0 lot lines, which means all the way to the edge of the property. And the reason that we're doing that is because some of these districts have a ceiling height. So in order to get the most building on the lot that you can, you really want to kind of flatten out on your site so that you don't hit your ceiling on area too quickly. So an example in one of the districts, the B2C, you get 3 stories, by right. And then anything above that has to step back in. So you don't want to be stepping back on the ground floor because that's essentially just square footage lost because of that rule about how high you can go. Let's go to the next one. We did have some considerations above 3-story. There's basically something in Title 21 right now called the maximum tower dimension or the bulk tower dimension. And this is something that we'll come back to. The short of it is that it really limits the building forms that you can create over 3 stories high. And this is kind of an issue when you have a downtown where you're potentially trying to develop more residential units. I'll give you a kind of a visual example of this, and this is really number 4 here, but the current Title 21 bulk tower considerations basically act on anything above 3 stories. And what that does, because I'm a visual person, and I suspect you guys are too, is that anything above this 3-level platform right here, which can go out to the 0 lot line all the way to the edge of the lot, has to kind of suck back in and can't exceed a certain dimension here. And what that means is that anyone that's trying to develop, the maximum density on a site will basically build these square towers because that's your best floor plate for that dimension that you can get. A reason that that's an issue is that this is kind of a commercial building shape and this is a residential building shape. And the reason that those look different is because residential buildings have more code requirements related to access to natural light. So for example, a bedroom has to have an exterior window. So you end up with these building shapes that tend to be kind of longer and skinnier. But as you can see here, to build the same density as one of these square towers, you'd basically have to make 2 of them, which means double the elevators, double the mechanical shafts, everything else. It really just makes development really expensive for residential developers to build a lot of units. Another thing that this does is that any effort that a developer puts into basically winning extra square footage, which we'll talk about, say that this is an area where you get 3 floors right off the bat. Well, if you want extra bonus, then you do things down here like you add bike parking or you add underground parking spaces or structured parking. But what you see is then all that bonus, basically gets lost in this area here. Like your residential building needs to be shaped like this, but you can't have this square area and you can't extend your building over to sort of recapture that square footage.
Hey,
Pardon
Corey.
my, yeah.
Sorry,
Oh.
Ron has his hand up.
Okay, yep, go ahead, Ron.
Did this change in the 2015 code, or is it then the same in the old code and the new code right now?
Christine can probably speak to the history there.
Yeah. So Ron, this is the existing downtown code. Remember, we took the code and just reformatted it, and that became available for people to use in that reformat in 2020. But the reason for this planning effort and then for this capacity study, as well as the urban design subcommittee that we had, is to have these 3 different efforts point out to us what needs to be changed in the downtown code. So
yeah,
that's
I was just trying to understand if it was, and so what this was an area that was never even looked at in the new code.
Right.
And so this is where we're going to get it fixed and make it more, okay, perfect.
Yeah, so the Bettisworth team is going to have a list of recommendations for us. Yeah. We're going to bring our urban design subcommittee back together. Bettisworth North is going to help us next year. And we're going to go through and update the downtown code to bring it forward to the assembly for adoption with a long list of changes.
Right. No, perfect. That I thought that. I just wanted to make sure that something in the last 5 years didn't screw that all up. And so it just has been that way, and now's the time to fix it. So thank you.
Yes. Good question.
Yeah, Ron, you just used my second favorite F word, which is fix, related to zoning. So I'm super happy to hear you say that, you might identify this as an issue, because we certainly see it as a problem, and I'll show you exactly why. So basically what this advantages commercial builders because they get a big, fat, square floor plate, which is horrific when you're building commercial space where you have lots of areas that don't need access to natural light, like server rooms, or, you know, massive mechanical cores, et cetera. So what you see is, you know, this is what you get with however many years of that code in place, is you just get a downtown full of these kind of extruded square towers, which again, great for commercial, but terrible for residential, which prefers these longer, skinnier structures, which just aren't allowed right now without some kind of special waiver. So to show you some examples, I just grabbed a few from my hometown of Columbus, Ohio. But you know, these types of narrow forms that kind of spread out across the site, that diagonal would exceed that amount and is not allowed. You know, a long narrow building like that that's over 3 stories, again, you know, all of these basically get axed because they're exceeding that maximum dimension. Even though these are, you know, completely code safe, you know, appropriate forms, they're really kind of exceeding that that dimension that's built into the Title 21 code right now. I do want to caveat that I think some of the reasoning behind this initially was to preserve solar access and to not create these deep, you know, canyons and shadows in the downtown Anchorage area. But there are a lot more modern ways of dealing with building form than this one in particular. And I'll point to one in the Denver code right now, their current code, which is called an incremental building mass reduction, which is kind of fantastic for developers because it allows you to kind of pick where you want to reduce that shape. And as a municipality, you guys can also drive that, you know, maybe that shape gets skinnier as it gets taller, but you're not limiting people in terms of the diagonals that they can get, which again disadvantages residential buildings. So once we're done with this presentation, I'm going to pack all this information out and we'll make it available, both the written summary and some of this visual stuff. So that's one of the biggest ones is, you know, this form factor is really hampering basically residential development above a certain height. And I'll go through the next one pretty quickly because I know you guys will probably have questions as we go. But we'll jump back to some of these considerations. So we're assuming no loading zones or surface parking because they're not required by code and they don't provide bonus area, which again, we're trying to figure out how we can kind of work the bonus table to get density above that baseline. So the way that we basically approach the bonus floor area chart, which is again baked into Title 21, is we looked at things that would be like quote unquote reasonable for the average development. So the below grade parking, you know, or even in this case, structured parking and below grade parking both have a pretty significant bonus that you get for building it out. But we only assume this on lots exceeding 25,000 square feet. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's going to require a certain length of ramp to get down into that lower level. So if you're working on small lots, you know, your ramp will eat up the entire lot just getting down there. And
Hey, Corey.
oh yeah, go ahead, Ron.
Just to let you know, there's a lot of groundwater down there in the downtown area. So I don't even know if you could do below grade parking down there. When we did the Marriott Tower, they hit water like at 9 feet or something like that. And so it ended up being a huge concrete base for the building is what they ended up doing down there because there was, you know, there's so much dewatering that has to go down. So obviously, if you got to do dewatering, there's groundwater there and there'd be a problem. So just to mention that, just in passing before we get too far on being able to maybe do, you know, you can suggest it, but it's a big problem downtown.
Yep. And this is exactly what we heard from Shauna and others is that the development costs of below grade parking is astronomical. And I'll show you why that's a problem. But, you know, basically, you're getting a bonus of around 5,600 square feet for each space that you build, which is, you know, it completely out of scale with every other bonus in here. It's basically advantaging large lots and developers that have a ton of money to build that density.
Hey, Corey, I'm sorry to interrupt. Could we look at the table just so we can have a brief overview of how it works and why it exists in code?
Yes. I don't know why it exists, but yeah, we can talk about how it works. So here's kind of this this master table of bonuses. It's 21.11-6, and it is design, amenities, and bonus floor area. So the way that things are structured now is, as I mentioned, each district gets like a base number of floors. You know, you get 3 stories, you get 5, or you get 9. Those are basically the breakdowns at each level. And let me scroll to that piece just so I can show you here. So here you go. Here's B2A, and you get 9 stories by right, which means, you know, you get 3 of a podium, and then you get 6 of that square shape above if you're building out as much as possible. In B2B, you'll get 5 stories, and then again, podium plus some floors above. And then in B2C, you basically get just a podium if you're building it out as much as possible. And for our purposes here, we're looking at mixed use. One, because that's what the you know, districts are each kind of encouraging, and the other is because you can build out to the edge of the lot in each of these, which again keeps your square footage super high. So that's kind of that's the first step of working through this. How big of a building can I make? Again, prioritizing density.
I wanted to say, I think the code change that we're putting through right now makes the residential not have that 5 foot anymore. I think we make a match it. The omnibus ordinance that Michelle helped put together, I think I think so. I think what you're saying, that I think we got rid of, if I remember right, Christine,
yes, we got rid of that, Ron. I put that language in to get rid of that.
Okay, perfect. So I just wanted to make sure when we're comparing, we can't use that as an argument anymore because the code has changed and varied that. So anyway, just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and I'm glad to see that's gone. I suspect that some of these were kind of baked in there because, you know, your building would have to step in order to get windows at those lower floors if your neighbor built all the way up to the edge of the lot. So really, site constraints are going to determine exactly how it's done. But for our thoughts, you know, if we're building a mixed use building, which is basically a ground floor of retail, you could build all the way out to the edge, because really the only frontage that you need is going to be the glass, you know, entry at the sidewalk where you're coming in, and you don't care if you've got solid walls down the length of your lot there. So that's a great note, and thanks for highlighting that. And we'll be you know, we're not hinging our argument on that at all. We're just assuming mixed use buildings, and we're ignoring exclusively residential buildings. So after you figure out, you know, okay, I get 3, 5, or 9 stories, then you kind of have to jump into this earn it stage of building your buildings. And it really literally is like a line item by line item tabulation of everything that you're going to provide, you know, this amenity in order to win bonus floor area. So, you know, some examples here that we used, I've kind of highlighted them already. So we considered street trees, street furniture, like seating and decorative lighting as being built in to every one of these calculations. Again, because there's a certain amount of character that the downtown is trying to encourage. We also assumed enclosed bike parking. One, because it had a really high return on investment for every like bike hanger that you put in a closet in your building, but also because it supports some of the like multimodal attitudes in Anchorage. And then, kind of as I mentioned just a minute ago, we're also considering ground floor retail, which gives you, you know, a pretty significant bonus for every 1 square foot of retail you have on the ground floor. You basically get 3 bonus square feet up above, and those numbers kind of drop off as you go into the different districts.
And Corey, do you mind if I jump in really quick?
Yeah.
So the goal of this was to figure out, if we could, what the maximum build out number was for these lots. So that drove a lot of these considerations as well. We were taking a look at these tables thinking, okay, what's a reasonable request, or maybe a reasonable request of a request for a developer in this table, and what would provide the most bonus area to reach that maximum build out. So it was this balancing between, can we really ask the developers to provide this, and how much benefit will they get from it, and how can we maximize that build out. So it was a little bit of picking and choosing, but we left things out like sidewalk texture, because that ends up moving the building away from the 0 lot line, reducing the floor plate, which means, I'm sure Corey is going to cover this soon, which means they hit that cap that much sooner. So we selected things that didn't impact the maximum build out number in the end.
Yep.
And sorry to interrupt your
No.
flow, Corey.
No, that's exactly right. We were looking for like basically the best return on investment for what you put in that also kind of met some of these character things. And we ignored some of these just like outrageous one-off kind of items, like 12,000 square feet of bonus for a skywalk or, wind tunnel test. Again, I think some of these only come into play on those massive lots that are going to exceed an acre. And then the last thing that I really wanted to highlight, and that I think we're going to highlight as really being an issue, is that the structured parking below grade is the most valuable of almost anything on this list. That kind of falls within that realm of reason, and essentially what it does is it super advantages developers, but it also means that there's a huge economic bar to just building over a certain height. Probably tens of millions of dollars to build sub-grade parking, in addition to some of those things you mentioned, Ron, like if you've got dewatering or sump pumps that have to run just as a function of keeping the building occupiable, let alone just the amount of structure that you've got to put under the ground. So especially in a seismic area. So I'll show you how this kind of stacks up in a building in just a second. But really, in the bonus tables, we looked at kind of these simple things: trees, seating, bike parking, and then mixed use, so retail on the ground floor. And then on big lots, we looked at the potential for there to be structured parking. So I think that's really kind of the Title 21 implications, that you get a certain amount of density, but that density that you get is actually pretty low relative to a downtown area. And then developers almost have to fight tooth and nail to get anything beyond that. And kind of the easiest way, but certainly not the cheapest, is for them to build in parking. I think there are some examples where parking will just get built anyway, but as a result of market factors like residential, for example, it's hard to sell residential units if you don't provide some kind of parking. But I think having that built in as a necessity to build that density is unfortunate. So we'll go through this quick because we already nailed it, but we're looking at mixed use. We're looking at a certain amount of plantings for some bonus area. We're looking at indoor parking because, again, that's an easy bonus for especially small lot owners. Let's kind of zoom through these. Another thing is the residential dwellings per acre are actually pretty low for a downtown. These are driven by this downtown land use districts, which, as Christine mentioned, was really kind of a holdover from a previous thing. We'll kind of point out, what that density looks like, but it is quite low for a downtown that's looking to add significant amounts of residential.
Corey.
Looks like Dave has a question, Corey.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. I just had a quick question on the bonus points. I think when we were looking at bicycle parking, I think you had like 2 square feet per every 1 square feet. Then you went down, you had, I think, 5 square feet per 2 square feet. I was wondering why the change in, let's see, where is it?
Are you talking about the retail or bike?
Oh, I'm sorry, right there, retail. Where you said, yep, 5 square feet of bonus per 2 square feet of gross floor area. Why not keep the number consistent with 1 square feet and go to, the reason I say that is because what I've found in implementation is that if a developer falls just short of that 2 square feet, they don't get any credit for it at all. So by moving to a consistent 1 square feet, they might, 1 square feet to say 2.5 square feet. I would recommend keeping that number consistent.
I think some of this was probably driven by this is basically a 3-to-1. So you get for every,
exactly
1,000 square feet of retail, you get 3,000 bonus of floors. So by having a gradient, they are really trying to incentivize people in the core of downtown to build retail on the ground floor. And then it's sort of dropped off. And curiously enough, this one is only a 2 multiplier in that. And I'm not sure why why the B2B is sort of disadvantaged in that way, but I agree, cleaning that up would probably make it a lot simpler for developers.
Yeah, I just saw that a couple times as you were scrolling through the bonus points. I would just keep it all consistent if you could.
Yep.
Just from an implementation standpoint, it seems to make sense. But thanks.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there's a lot of complexity. I won't hide this. I think the table is a real challenge and kind of a frustrating element, I would imagine, for developers to have to work through and justify every move that they make towards building density, which ultimately, advantages the downtown, but they have to kind of fight for it at a certain point.
Agreed. Thank you.
So yeah, certainly. Thanks for pointing that out. And, we kind of ran into that at every turn. Like, here the structured parking is worth different values in different zones, even though, it might be one block to the next is different. So it's curious why some of these are so different. But I imagine they were just trying to really incentivize people in the middle to do, a certain thing over their neighbors in other districts. All right. So the dwelling units per acre, we'll kind of talk about that, but at the very least, what we'd kind of recommend in that regard is that be raised. One of the biggest issues by limiting your low, having a limit on your dwelling acres is that it kind of discourages developers from providing lots of different unit sizes, especially on the smaller scale. Say your lot can accommodate 10 dwellings, or if you're, going to do studios or something that might fit on 2 floors, and then you've run out of area for doing residential units, versus doing like larger units where you can have more area, which is going to get a better return for the developer. So I think removing those caps will allow developers to provide a kind of variety and diversity of unit sizes, which allows people of different income levels to live in downtown. You're not advantaging people that can afford over a certain size unit. And then bulk tower requirements, we talked about that. I think the takeout there, or the understanding there, is that this basically disadvantages shorter, thinner, longer buildings, which are more likely to accommodate residential uses. So I'll skip ahead. The punchline there is that should probably be eliminated or changed.
Corey, I'm sorry to jump in again. We're getting close to the top of the hour. I'm wondering if we should just skip to our recommendations, if Christine is okay with that.
However you want to move forward.
Okay. Sounds great. Yeah, thanks, Melissa, for watching the clock. Then the other big problem is the cap on the number of stories in the downtown districts. Like I mentioned, this whole process is about going through these hoops to get bonus area. But then, if you can only build at a certain height, it kind of disincentivizes making any of these nice amenities, because you're basically going to hit a ceiling. So I'll just kind of scroll down and show what that looks like here. But, basically, on a small lot like this, say you do 1 level of retail on the ground floor, you get these extra 2 podium levels. And then, maybe you get a floor that's set back because it's got some solar. But then because the district, like Barrow Street, for example, here is this kind of red ceiling, you can't really build above that because of what the district plan currently says. So any bonuses that you get for retail, or any bonuses that you get for site amenities like trees, etc., basically everything north of that ceiling gets lost. So I think that's another thing to reconsider, is that the ceilings in some areas are low by design, like the Mushing district, which wants to maintain a certain character, but in other areas the ceiling can really cost the developer basically part of their site, if let alone all of their bonus earnings on any of their ground level investments. So this is a small site that doesn't have parking, which I mentioned we weren't calculating. And then when you start looking at really large lots like this one here, here's your built-in area, these kind of white ones. And then if you build even 1 level of underground parking, this is the bonus that you get. You can see all these blue levels here. So it is just, like I mentioned, just so many more times valuable by square footage than you get for, here's your trees, these yellow levels, trees, seating, bike parking, that gets you about a floor at this scale of lot. And then your pink areas, this is your retail investment. You get, maybe 2.5 floors out of that. So you can really just see the advantage right now is to a developer that can throw down, millions of dollars to get underground parking. Otherwise, your building is only going to make it up to your by right stories plus maybe 2 or 3 stories on top of that. So by having this table built in, we are already limiting the build out, capacity of some of your downtown areas. And yeah, we can just jump into the kind of, suggestions basically, but I guess we'll kind of start at the top here and then we'll have a few minutes for questions. But to encourage density, our suggestion or our recommendation is to move away from the current design amenities because it rewards underground parking, which is really expensive. And it also kind of chews away at density. Say people are building structured above ground parking. That's less building that you have above ground for, leasable residential space or leasable commercial spaces. So I guess our recommendation is to move away from that table and potentially look at some other models, which I'll talk about in just a second. I'll talk about right now, actually, because it's number 2. But our suggestion would be to move to more of an FAR model, and FAR stands for floor area ratio, and it's basically a built-in density that you get. And if you do want to drive this sort of character, then you basically say, hey, okay, if you're going to build here, you get to build at a much higher density than our previous by right floors, but you might be able to stipulate that there are some price of entry things like, you're going to provide trees, you're going to provide a certain level of character at the street level, and then you can build really high without having to jump through all these hoops up above. Removing downtown story limits is, I think, a good idea too, because that doesn't disincentivize people providing things at the ground level like plazas or extra sidewalks. Story limits right now, like I mentioned, puts a ceiling on your lot, which means that you don't want to scoot your building in because it'll basically squirt your building up and you'll lose that square footage, kind of like we saw in those previous diagrams. Removing the cap on dwelling units per acre, I think, is a good idea. You could provide a range or like a suggested range, but I think that removing that gives developers more freedom to create housing at different unit sizes, scales, and price points. And then the last one is to eliminate that bulk tower maximum dimension line item, again, because it's driving this trend of square commercial towers, and it doesn't allow for some of these more modern residential forms that are longer and thinner. And that's it, just a short 52-minute discussion of our findings. I guess we didn't get too much into the sheets or the calculations, but we do have substantial amount of kind of backup here that kind of works through each of these and the kind of densities that you get, and also highlights where these regulations between Title 21 and the districts run into each other. So I'll just do Barrow here really briefly, but Barrow kind of, after you work through the math on each of these lots, Title 21 essentially allows for a certain amount of density, or in this case, FAR of 7. But then when you apply the district overlays, you basically are limited to 4, which means you're going to lose a certain amount of square footage and floors in those areas. And I think our previous conversations with Christine is some of that is by design, and some of that probably just needs to be modified to accommodate the kinds of residential or commercial buildings that you want to see go up in Anchorage. Because I think what some developers probably do is they see that a certain return on investment is just not possible on a lot, and they don't approach it for development because they know they can't get the density that they're targeting. So we've identified in each of these different districts where you'll see problems. So in this case, a half-acre lot in Denali View is going to have problems where its density is limited. The downtown core has got a couple examples. The East Avenues, same, you can see these deltas. And really it's on the large lots because that bonus square footage you get for parking is just so intense and so high. And then we've worked through Mushing District, Park Strip North, and ultimately the Pioneer Slope. So this will all be in our kind of debrief pack to Christine, but basically our recommendations plus these calculations, I think, will be a tool to help the municipality understand, where it can modify some of its regulations so that it's not discouraging development. And the last piece is this tool that we've built that is essentially an Excel file where you can play with some of the variables in this in order to see, where you're creating conflicts between your different regulations. Does anyone have any questions?
Corey, can you zoom out for a minute on your, your table there, and that one where you have the different questions there, which actually I think maybe it's a little bit higher. Oh yeah, the flow chart there. Can you show that to Ron?
This one here?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, so this is a summary of everything that we've done, but we took the lot area, we added in these kind of stories by right, which again, it's 3 for B2C, 5 for B2B, and 9 for B2A. We added in these likely bonuses that would be sought by developers because they have a good return. So some street amenities, trees, and then also parking here. And then after we got this, we've added all that up, and that gives us kind of this big number. And we considered, the podium thing, the step backs for solar, and that gave us a certain number. And then after we applied the downtown district allowances, that essentially gave us, a kind of density or an amount of density that was allowed on any given lot. So this is the kind of rough summary of how all this stuff works, and I've tried to visually simplify it, but there's quite a bit that goes behind tabulating all this stuff. And I think our output is basically if you have a lot of a certain scale, here's your maximum build out currently, and then the municipality can make decisions about whether to lift some of those restrictions or to modify them in some way.
Yeah. So Ron, it probably would have been much more advantageous for us to do this work before we started the update to the plan, but luckily we've got it done. And when I went to the Planning and Zoning Commission on December 6th, I told them that we were doing these calculations and that we were going to come back with them to a report to show them how we can amend the plan a little bit before it goes to the assembly to show them things that we need to update in the plan. So I tried to be very transparent with the Planning and Zoning Commission to let them know that there were going to be a few recommendations or a few changes in the plan before we go to the assembly. So anyway, I think we're on pretty good ground with that, but what I will be doing, and hopefully Shanna will help me with that, and maybe Melissa, is do like a work session with the Planning and Zoning Commission to let them know what we found with this study, as well as once we get done with that funding working group, we'll have a report from that, and we'll take that to the Planning and Zoning Commission as something that's informational too. So I think
what you're going to do is incorporate a little bit of this and then incorporate the action plans out of what's in here. So then after the plan is adopted, we can go after the Title 21 fixes as fast as possible.
Yes. Yeah.
This has been very good. I completely understand everything that Corey went through and his team. I mean, it's really nicely put together, and although you say it's complex, I mean, I can see, I think you've simplified it very well for a person. I mean, being an engineer rather than a planner, it's fairly easy to follow. It was fairly easy to understand some of the aspects of Title 21 that I don't typically deal with. And so I commend you guys on putting this together. I think the information is laid out very clear, very clean. It makes sense. You've noticed where the code is constrictive on the developing, and everything that you've talked about here and putting forward. And then if we get this into the plan, it's what everybody that I see in planning is trying to go for, as well as what's being out in the industry, both by you know, the assembly by the mayor's office. I think this is one of those areas that, you know, I think all the people can get together and fall behind something and get something really moving forward for our city. So I really appreciate the time that you guys obviously spent in this, but I think you made it very comprehensible is what I'm saying. And so I think that's the biggest thing in these type of things, is making everybody understand where you're going at and what the problems are and how to get there. And so this is one of the better presentations that I've had with regard to Title 21 that simplified it, but yet kept it to what it says, and then came with recommendations to fix. So anyway, I do have to run to another meeting. I just wanted to say that before I take off, because this is a really, really good study and results and info and presentation and results. So anyway, your team should be very well commended for what you guys done. This is really cool.
Great. Thanks for the praise, Ron. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ron. And we recorded this, so we'll be able to share the link so that Adam or anybody else that wants to take a look at it can.
Perfect. Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for taking the time.
So,
all right.
Craig and David, do you guys have any questions? I don't know if you need to run as well, or if you want to stay on for a moment and discuss any of this stuff. I'm available still.
I don't have any questions.
I've got no additional questions, Corey. I just say thank you. I'm incredibly impressed by what you've done here, and yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Great. All right. Terrific. Well, thank you guys for your time. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that it was comprehensible. I was trying to take the private misery of developers and share it with you guys, developers and architects, I should say, just so you understand kind of what goes into trying to get a certain size building created in downtown Anchorage, and some of the areas where I think you guys can simplify the process so you get more of what you're hoping for out of the development community.
All right, great. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for your time, Craig. Thanks, David.
All right. Thanks, team, for everybody being here so early in the morning. And I really appreciate your time. And have a great rest of the day. And we'll be doing the good work. Corey, we're going to miss you.
Oh, I'll still be around. I'll be moving to Anchorage in 5 years anyway, so I can only take this 40 below so many more times.
All right, sounds perfect.
All
okay,
right,
everybody have a great day.
Okay,
right,
thanks,
you
Christine.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.